Okay guys, so today I am continuing my White Forest for Beginners series. This is part 2, this time updated for Alliance Insight format. I would like to accomplish 3 separate things in this video, which I will list now so you know if you should stick around to find out more, or click off and don't bother watching the rest. First of 3 things, I would like to explain why Diabellze the White Witch and Diabellze Vengeance, this is the updated name, Vengeance, are an extremely important new part of our game plan and why you should think about the deck a little bit differently to before. Secondly, of 3 things, I will briefly go over my choices for the main and extra deck, also talking about which cards I think are flex spots versus which are mandatory and other options you can consider but you don't have to play. I go into a lot more detail on this in my deck profile for the pure version of this, and I also have a deck profile for Fiendsmith, so I'll put those links in the description if you're interested in those. And then thirdly, I will show you some combo lines to explain why the sequencing of your plays is extremely important because there are very big differences in efficiency based on how you order your plays, and the sequencing should basically always be geared towards accomplishing one specific game plan every single game, and that is the easiest way to learn how to play this deck. So, let's begin with number 1. Why do Diabellze the White Witch and Diabellze Vengeance change this deck so much? First of all, Diabellze the White Witch is a level 8 illusion monster that is always treated as a White Forest card, so this is both a White Forest card and a Diabellze card. Monsters you control cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects while you control 2 or more Diabellze monsters. Now this is a Diabellze monster, this is a Diabellze monster, this is a Diabellze monster, and this is a Diabellze monster. So we're almost always going to have that effect live, so that's like a nice protection effect that will be very relevant against Mitsurugi in the next format. Okay. Then it says, you can only use each of the following effects of Diabellze the White Witch once per turn. You can send one spell or trap from your hand or field to the graveyard as cost, so that's the typical White Forest gimmick. Special summon this card from your hand. Then, separate effect, if this card is normal or special summon, you can send a Sinful Spoils or Diabellze card from your deck to the graveyard. Now, because these are separate effects, the effect to summon itself and the effect when it is summoned to dump a Sinful Spoils or Diabellze card, it means that you could summon this off of, like LZ Azamina's hand effect, Monster Reborn, anything, you will always get that effect to dump. Usually, the Diabellze card you will be sending to the graveyard when it is summoned is Curse of Diabellze. So this has 2 effects. The first one says, if you control 2 or more Diabellze monsters, send a monster you control to the graveyard as cost, destroy all face-up cards your opponent controls. Now that is a very strong effect, but this card is important not for this reason, it is important for the second reason, which is if this card is sent to the graveyard or banished from the hand or deck, you can add one Diabellze spell or trap from your deck to your hand, except itself. So the Diabellze spell or trap you will be adding from your deck to your hand almost always is Filia Diabellze. Well, in this version, it will always be this card. So add one level 8 or higher Diabellze monster from your deck to your hand, or if only your opponent controls a monster, you can special summon it instead. So when you're going first, you typically would Diabellze the White Witch, dumps Curse. Curse gives you Filia Diabellze, and because this can add a level 8 or higher Diabellze monster, it cannot add the Black Witch, and it cannot add the original Diabellze the Sin Keeper, unfortunately, because that's a level 7. It can add Diabellze Vengeance. Now this card is always treated as a Sinful Spoils card, so this is both a Sinful Spoils card and a Diabellze card. You can banish a spell and trap from your hand and or graveyard, special summon this card from your hand or graveyard. So you can see that it's very important that this card has dumped a trap, and now after having a spell, you also have a spell engrave. So you would have a trap and a spell engrave, and you can banish those cards to special summon this from your hand or grave. Then, quick effect. You can pay half your life points, then target one card your opponent controls. Destroy it. Then, if another Diabellze monster card is on the field, which you will have Diabellze on field, you can special summon one illusion or spellcaster tuner synchro monster from your extra deck, and this is once per turn. So, this is important for 2 reasons. The least important reason, but still important, is that you have, aside from Diabellze, the OG Diabellze Queen of the White Forest, you have now another way to make your opponent guess at what card you're going to bring out from your extra deck, because there's Silvera, which we've been doing multiple times per turn because it's not once per turn before. There's Arciela, which can search a Veiler out of turn or fall off if we don't need it. And now there is Mystic Mystery of the White Forest. So this card, I think, is a little bit overrated, but it's still a very important part of the game plan. So if this card is special summoned, you can target 2 White Forest monsters in your graveyard, place them face up in their owner's spell and trap zone as continuous spells. During your opponent's main phase, you can, quick effect, immediately after this effect resolves, synchro summon using this card you control. The second effect is usually the important effect, and this is important because it's different to Woes, which locks you into summoning White Forest monsters. This does not force you to summon any type of monster. You can summon anything as long as you have the legal materials on field. Okay, I think that that's all I wanted to talk about for those cards here, aside from mentioning also that Foolish Burial Goods is basically independent access to your Diabellze engine. So Foolish Burial Goods, in my opinion, is debatably a staple card for this deck because this can dump Curse, because it dumps any spell or trap. Curse adds Philia. Philia can add Diabellze the White Witch, and as long as you have a spell or trap to send, you can dump that to special summon it from your hand, and when it is summoned, you can now dump the Diabellze of the Vengeance, and because this card can summon from either hand or grave, and you will then have a spell and trap in grave, you can summon this card. So no matter what happens with your original ladder, if this is completely stopped, as long as you have drawn Foolish Burial Goods or whatever your access to Diabellze is, you can always get your Vengeance on the field, and that will always give you a pop out of turn, and then a synchro summon into whatever it is that you're trying to go into. In terms of the flex spots here, I go into this in more depth in my deck profile, which will be linked in the description, but I think that you have to be careful with the field spell, which, when activated, adds a White Forest monster from your deck to your hand, but you cannot special summon dark monsters from your extra deck for the rest of the turn. This Dark Lock is important because if you are forced to start with this card, which you would never start with, you cannot go through your Azamina stuff. If this card is negated, so like if you activate and you want to search a card and they ash you, you are not Dark Locked, so remember that. It also can turn a White Forest monster you control into a tuner for the rest of the turn. That almost never comes up. And the first time each White Forest monster you control will be destroyed by battle each turn, it is not destroyed. That's not super relevant, but it does come up and you should pay attention to it. But the point is that if you are Dark Locked, you can't make Little Knight, which is very useful for play around stuff like Nib Imperm, and you can't do your Azamina stuff. So things that are not dark are nice to have, not necessarily needed, but they're nice to have. So one option is Jura, the Cursed Thunder Deity. I will show you a combo line where this could come up. And Snake Eyes Doom Dragon works very well with how Mystic Mystery works. There are other options like the Crimson Dragon package where you can go into a Blazar, but I think this is kind of like a win more package, and you really don't need it. If you are able to get this far anyhow, you are probably going to win that game and you don't need it. But it is worth mentioning that Centurion Legatia is a pretty useful card when you don't want to go into Snake Eyes Execute Dragon, which is kind of like the last new card for us. So this card is a fire, so we're never going to be locked out of this by using our field spell, and it says, during the main phase quick effect, you can target one face-up monster on the field or in either graveyard, place it face-up in its owner's spell and trap zone as a continuous spell. Also, this card cannot use this effect next turn, so that's kind of like Mirror Jade. During the battle phase, quick effect, you can target 2 cards on the field, 1 monster and 1 continuous spell, destroy them. So this is a very strong type of removal because they don't get that resource in the grave or wherever. And Legatia is sometimes better if you really want the draw, like in a simplified game state, or you specifically want to pop a card, or you've already gone through your Snake Eyes Execute and you need another level 12. So there are many other options that you could include in the deck, but I won't be going over them in detail right now. Okay, now let me go on to some of the replays. So let me show you the basic ladder in Alliance Insight. So we're going to start with Elzette and any blank spell or trap. It doesn't matter what it is. So we dump the spell or trap to get our Sylvie of the White Forest, because this can usually search us our tails, and this is what allows our basic ladder to be so efficient, and I go through this in more detail in my pre-Alliance Insight video. So now when you go into Arciela, you can pitch any spell or trap, which will be your tails, to search for any White Forest card or any light spellcaster monster. Normally, because you want to complete the ladder into Diabellze, you're going to be searching for Azamina Elzette, and you have your tails, which is left over to activate and search for Diabellze the White Witch. Now, the most important thing that you should remember, if there's one takeaway from this entire video, is that this card needs to be protected at all costs. You will never, in any scenario, unless you are absolutely forced to and you have no choice, you will never summon this card before you have a protection for this card, because this card is the one that has to resolve to get Vengeance on field and give you your out-of-turn pop and out-of-turn synchro summon. So, we have the tails in the graveyard because we've resolved it. We summon Azamina Elzette and go into our Diabellze, the OG Diabellze, Queen of the White Forest. So now our Azamina Elzette can search for a Sinful Spoils card, which will be Deception of the Sinful Spoils, and our Diabellze can add back a spell or trap. Usually you add back Tails, because in your opponent's turn, this is the thing that you would prefer to send, because it will reset itself, so it's a free send off of Diabellze. And also, this card is follow-up, because you'll be able to search on the crackback. So here you can activate Deception, and you want a free tribute, so you can shuffle back the Arciela Engrave to summon out your Sylvie, and then this is just like a free body that you can tribute for Deception to search for your Hallowed. So now when you Hallowed, you are going to summon Murcielago. I have made a video on how to play around Nib already, and I will do another updated one for Alliance Insight format, so I won't go into depth on this, but trust me, this is a very safe way to play into Nib. So now the Murcielago will search for your Wanted, And you can add back Hallowed Azamina from grave by shuffling back Azamina-Elzette from your grave into your deck, and now you have another Sinful Spoils card that you can use to summon off of Hallowed Azamina. So you Hallowed, then you Chainlink 2 Wanted, because cards aren't sent to the graveyard until the end of the chain. Like spells and traps don't go to the grave until the end of the chain. So even though you're using Wanted, as the chain resolves, Chainlink 2 Wanted searches Witch, but it stays on field because the chain isn't finished yet. And now you go to Chainlink 1 Hallowed Azamina, and this can then send the Wanted to the graveyard to summon your Ilia Sylvia. So now you have the Omni-Negate on field, and really, I promise you that the nib doesn't matter for this type of stuff, so watch that video if you're interested in why. Okay, so now you can send the Murcielago, which is used to special summon your Black Witch, and this will set your Sinful Spoils of the White Forest. This is a very important card for most of our lines because it's both part of our resources and also part of our ceiling. A very important point if you're not familiar with layers in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is you can have as many monsters on your field as you like, but if your opponent just goes Dark Ruler, they are worth nothing. So you always want to have your interruptions spread across the monster zone, the spell and trap zone, if possible also your hand, and also your graveyard. And that is the sign usually of a good deck, how spread out its layers are and how strong each of those layers are. Okay, so now we can Diabellze the White Witch, send Sinful Spoils of the White Forest to dump a Diabellze card, and of course we will be able to reset this because it's a White Forest card. So when we dump Curse of Diabellze, because it's a Diabellze card, this can now add a Diabellze spell or trap from our deck to our hand, and we can use Philia to search for Diabellze Star Vengeance. So now we can summon Vengeance by banishing a spell or trap from our grave, and Philia has the secondary effect to permanently boost our Diabellze monsters by 500 attack, which is, fine. In the end phase, we will reset Deception of the Sinful Spoils and pass turn. So what happens here is if our opponent does whatever, you can do whatever order you want to do stuff in. You have Sinful Spoils of the White Forest where you could potentially go into a Guardian Chimera play, or because Diabellze Star, the Syndicator, or it's now called Vengeance, is a fiend, and it's also a level 6 or higher fiend, you have other options, like you could make more Regina, but I think it's probably going to be more often that you make Azamina Sol, because this will give you a free send. So this will always be live. This isn't just like a random card. But anyhow, Diabellze Star Vengeance can pop a card our opponent controls and then special summon from our extra deck. In this case, we can make Mystic Mystery, which can then synchro summon into, for example, Snake Eyes Execute Dragon. And then this one is a push back into the spell and trap zone. So this is what the basic idea of the game is, and of course, remember, out of turn, you can bring back your Sylvie, because you can shuffle back that Mystic Mystery that you just synchroed into, and that will be able to trigger your Elzette, and your Elzette comes back to your hand. So never forget the basics. The Sylvie coming back out of turn to trigger the Elzette of the White Forest, if there was no other way for you to trigger this, is a very important part of your resource economy. So that's the very, very basic ladder. And I also am just showing you here that you can Sinful Spoils of the White Forest even to make like Snake Eyes Doom Dragon, because remember that Snake Eyes Execute is a Snake Eyes monster, and Diabellze is an illusion. So let's say you've resolved Diabellze, maybe they've cleared half your field, and now you use Sinful Spoils of the White Forest, and you fuse Diabellze, which is an illusion monster, and Snake Eyes Execute, which you've already also used, into Snake Eyes Doom Dragon. And when this card is summoned, you have a trigger effect where you can target a face-up monster on the field, place it in its owner's spell and trap zone as a continuous spell. So this is really like quite a lot of different layers and different options as well. It's not like just because you set Sinful Spoils of the White Forest, your opponent knows that you're going to make Guardian Chimera. So that's also important, keep your opponent guessing. Okay, so that was the basic ladder. Let me also show you, even though I really don't like this combo, I'm going to show you the Chorozo line because people always ask about this when I don't show it. Chorozo is an optional card you can play for when you have drawn Wanted or Black Witch and you have no other way to play. This usually telegraphs to your opponent that your hand is very, very weak. So, that's, and it also loses to one interaction, so it's not very strong. So you'll start by Wanted searching for Black Witch, and Black Witch will pitch any blank from your hand or field to set Deception of the Sinful Spoils. Here you tribute a monster blank, so not the Black Witch, to get Hallowed. Hallowed can now bring out Murcielago, which will search for Azamina-Elzette. This is important. You have to search for this off of the Murcielago for this to work, because you can turn both of those bodies into Chorozo, because this requires a Spellcaster monster in our Diabellze Star, and then a Fusion Synchro XYZ or Link, which is our Murcielago, to go into a level 4 tuner. So now we can add back Hallowed from grave by shuffling back Murcielago into the extra deck, and we haven't used Azamina-Elzette's hand effect to special summon itself. So now if we go into Arciela, we have a spell or trap in our hand to discard, and we can search for whatever. There are different ways that you can accomplish this, but I often like to search for tails instead of the monster tails is getting, so that when I make Diabellze, my Diabellze can add back tails as an option. Yeah, and then the Azamina Elzet will search for our Sinful Spoils of the White Forest, because we usually want this in rotation too, and we've already gone through both Wanted and Deception. So now I will activate Tails to search for Elzet, which we haven't used, pitch Sinful Spoils of the White Forest, which of course we get back for free, and the Elzet, which can now complete the ladder, is the last search that can give us Diabellze the White Witch. And remember, this is the card we really want to resolve. This is the card we always summon last. So this is protected here in our hand, waiting. We go for Diabellze, and here we add back our Tails, because this is usually what we want to send out of turn. But if you have no other blank spell or trap to pitch, then you will pitch the Tails off of Diabellze the White Witch. You could also just pitch Sinful Spoils of the White Forest if you think this won't be as useful. And now that your Diabellze can, after you reset your Tails, can dump Curse of Diabellze, which gives you your Filia Diabellze, and Filia Diabellze gives you the Vengeance. So I hope that you're starting to see a pattern here where you need to get a spell and trap in the grave to be able to summon Vengeance, and Vengeance is always accessible through Diabellze the White Witch. So that's the basic idea. You boost by 500 attack. In the end phase, you get back your Deception, and then whatever your opponent does, you have lots of options. You know, you can, let's say you've gone over all of your different card effects. You've used your Vengeance, or it was negated. You know, you've used your Diabellze, or it was negated. You still have this is an illusion and this is a fiend that you can turn into a Sol, and now you can get a send out of turn. And then if you keep the Sol in the crackback, he can add back, for example, a Sinful Spoils card from your graveyard to your hand. So that card is quite useful, Sol, and you know, you can see that your resources, you'll have like so many different things that you can play on the crackback as well, and you can, you know, go for like OTKs in whatever way you want. So a very, very simple board can turn into something very impressive as long as you keep Vengeance in rotation. Okay, I want to also show you what happens if you draw goods. Foolish Burial Goods. So if you were to go for the standard ladder where the Elzet of the White Forest will pitch your blank to go for the Sylvie, which gives you the Tails, because remember, you want a free send for Arciela that will reset itself, and now you can use that to get the last part of your ladder, which is the Azamina Elzet. And that can then go into Diabellze, which will add back the Tails, and the Azamina Elzet will give you your Deception, and then you bring out your Sylvie of the White Forest by shuffling back Arciela so that you have a free tribute for Deception to get your Hallowed. And here you Hallowed from Murcielago, which will give you your Wanted. You're always doing it in this order if you can, if it's possible. Because when you add back your Hallowed, with the Grave effect is only once per turn, but the Fusion is as many times per turn as you want, you can chain Wanted for that little trick where you search for the Witch, and then you get to bring out your Ilia Sylvia, so it's basically like a free summon. You want to search for the Wanted also, not just because it's a free fusion material, but because the Black Witch that you get off of Wanted is what gives you your Sinful Spoils of the White Forest, which otherwise you wouldn't have had the luxury to search because you needed to use your searches on other stuff so far. So yeah, now you haven't used any of these to search your Diabellze the White Witch. If you noticed, in our combo, Valor, the reason this is in our hand is because Arciela can search a light spellcaster monster. And so instead of searching for Diabellze, we've searched for Valor because we drew Foolish Burial Goods, which can dump Curse of Diabellze, which can add Filia, which can give us the Diabellze the White Witch, which can dump our Sinful Spoils of the White Forest, which will come back for free. And now, because you have accessed it through Goods, you dump the Vengeance directly off of Diabellze, and you have a spell and trap engraved that you can banish to summon the Vengeance. So the difference between opening Foolish Burial Goods and not is twofold. First of all, you don't have to use your search on getting access to Diabellze, you can use it on something else. And secondly, having a different layer is very important. Having another hand trap in hand, even if it's known, is much harder for your opponent to play around than just all of your interactions concentrated in your monster zone. Of course, this also makes it easier to play through interactions, because even if you were planning on using your Arciela or Tails or whatever to search for Diabellze and it was interrupted, as long as you have the goods and you've held it until the end, you can still goods and get everything here. Okay, then when your opponent, you know, it's their turn, you do whatever in whatever order you want. I think the last thing that I want to show you is if you do want to play Jura, which some people think is like an important tech card, we'll rush through this basic ladder again. You can easily set up your end board to make sure that you have Jura on field, and I'll show you what Jura does in a moment. But so, in your basic ladder, you always want to make Diabellze with the Azamina Elzet, and along the way, you have searched your Diabellze the White Witch. Off of whatever, it doesn't matter. However you got to it, it doesn't matter. As long as you have this card in hand, remember, you go through your entire ladder first, you try to force everything as much as you can before you go for Diabellze to bring out your Vengeance. You get your Sinful Spoils of the White Forest in the back row, so that's a different type of layer. And you're going to use the Diabellze Star, the Black Witch, and Sylvie of the White Forest to make your Jura. So the main difference between this and the combos I was showing you before is in the beginning, you need a tribute off of Deception, and so you bring out your Sylvie of the White Forest from the grave by shuffling back your Arciela, and that's how you have a body on field to have the free tribute for Deception. So in this case, if you tribute anything else, any blank in hand, you don't have to have used the Sylvie as your tribute for Deception. And so now, when it comes to the end board, you can use your Diabellze the Black Witch and your Sylvie that you saved because you had a different tribute fodder off of Deception to make your Jura. So this card is generic. It's a level 11 Earth, so you will never be dark locked out of this. Each time your opponent activates a card or effect, gain 300 life points immediately after it resolves. Of course, this is also a time card. During your opponent's turn, quick effect. You can pay 1500 life points and tribute this card, then activate one of these effects. Destroy all face-up monsters your opponent controls, or destroy all face-up spells and traps your opponent controls. So this is strong because this tributes for cost, which means that it won't be on field anymore, so it doesn't lose to stuff like skill drain or whatever. But also, you don't have to wait until your opponent activates an effect to respond. It's not like if your opponent summons Dormouse, there's nothing for you to Diabellze Chainlink 2 to summon Silvera and book it. They haven't used their effect yet, so you have to wait until they use the effect. With Jura, you can basically do this whenever you want. So this is a pretty strong boss monster type card. Anyhow, then of course, you've saved your Diabellze for last, so you Diabellze, dump Curse. Curse gives you Philia, and Philia can give you Vengeance, and now you have a spell and trap in the grave, and you can special summon the Vengeance. So you go to end phase, you reset your Deception, and now you pass turn and you play whatever way you were going to play. So you can Jura if that's what you want to do first, to blow up all their monsters, and you continue playing like that. One small point that I could mention here is there is still really no good play around Droll, okay? So I'm not going to lie to you and tell you there's a really good thing you can do. But let's say you open, a regular hand, so you have 5 cards, and let's say that one of the cards in your hand is Wanted. Okay, so you're going to begin as if you wanted to do your basic ladder, okay? So you have your Elzette of the White Forest, you pitch your blank. Usually you don't want to pitch goods, because goods is your insurance policy to make sure Diabellze resolves, but I'm just showing you, this is just a blank, but this could be Imperm, whatever. So you pitch your blank to summon Elzette, and you search for your Sylvie. On res, your opponent Drolls, so you can't search anymore. So you Chainlink 2 to Droll, Wanted, to add the Witch to your hand before the Droll resolves. One option is, you can normal your Sylvie, which cannot search because you're under Droll. You can send the Elzette, which there's no point in using as synchro material because the Arciella can't search either, and summon your Black Witch, which can set Sinful Spoils of the White Forest or whatever else you want to set. And because you have a level 4 tuner and a level 7 non-tuner, you could, for example, go into Jura, the Cursed Thunder Deity. And this is not great, but what you'd be trying to do here is survive on hand traps and win on the crackback with a boss monster like Jura. The other version of this that you can do is basically the same setup where you start, let's say, with like an Elzette, you search, they Droll you Chainlink 2 Wanted to search for the Witch. You Witch send this useless Elzette, for example, and you set Sinful Spoils of the White Forest. And you normal summon your Sylvie. You don't actually have to do it this way. You can keep the Sylvie in hand. I'm just showing it like this because you have an option, but you can keep the Sylvie in your hand in case you somehow survive off of your hand traps like Nibanash or whatever they happen to be. And in your opponent's turn, because you have Sinful Spoils of the White Forest live, you can now activate this and summon Guardian Chimera. Now, the reason that you don't necessarily want to summon the Sylvie, and it's probably better to keep it in hand, is your opponent has to make it worth it for you to Guardian Chimera for 2 bodies on field, so you have 2 pops and 1 draw. But you could just keep the Sylvie in hand, and you could use 1 monster on field and 2 in hand, and so you would have 1 pop and 2 draws, and you might draw into more hand traps. Obviously, this is not good. This is bad. You're probably not winning. I'm just saying that you do have some options around Droll that may or may not be good based on what's in your hand, and if you're going to cycle Black Witch out of turn, then of course you can use her effect and get another Simple Spoils set out of turn. Yeah, I think that's basically everything I wanted to cover. There is one other line that I can show you if this doesn't... Okay, there we go. So if you have Elzette and a blank spell or trap, there is another way where you can play pretty safely instead of just the basic ladder that I've shown you before by making a Little Knight when you're not dark locked. So here you do the basic combo. You search for Tales of the White Forest. You go into Arciella, send your Tails for free, get Azamina Elzette, which allows you to complete your ladder, and of course, your Tails you want in the grave before you go into Diabellze, because that's what you're adding back, and this gives you your Diabellze the White Witch, if you don't have access to it otherwise. So now you can go into Diabellze, your Azamina Elzette gives you your Deception, your Diabellze adds back your Tails, you bring out your Sylvie from the grave by shuffling back Arciella, so you have a free tribute for Deception. This gives you your Hallowed. You Hallowed for the Murcielago. Murcielago gives you your Wanted. You can add back your hallowed from grave by shuffling back Azamina Elzet. Now you can hallowed again, chain Wanted, give you your witch, make your Omni Negate here, and here I'm just showing that you have a Wanted draw. Usually I will allow the Deception to reset itself instead of Wanted draw, but I'm just showing that if you draw a blank, you can send the blank to summon the Diabellze, the Black Witch, and get your Sinful Swells, the White Forest. And now, because you have an extra body here, because you use your Murcielago as like a body to make something else, and that's why you use your Diabellze, sending a random blank in hand instead of a body on field, you can also make a Little Knight. And now, after all of this, you can Diabellze the White Witch to dump your Curse. Of course, you'll reset your Sinful Swells, the White Forest. Curse will give you Filius. Filius can give you Vengeance, and Vengeance now is basically your main boss monster. So you have your Spell or Trap, and you banish those. Now, the main reason that you would do this is because if you don't have Little Knight on field, your opponent can still, if they have like Nib Veiler or Nib Imperm, wait until you're going to say, okay, I'm trying to go end phase. They can Imperm your Ilia Sylvia, and then they can Nib you afterwards. Whereas here, you at least have, depending on their timing, a way to play around that, where you can Little Knight, target, your Diabellze and your Vengeance, or probably more likely your Diabellze Queen and your Vengeance, because this doesn't care what the other Diabellze monster is, it just has to be a Diabellze monster. So if these come back after the Nib, it doesn't really matter that much, and your opponent may also like misplay because they don't know how the interactions work with Ilia Sylvia and chaining with Little Knight and whatever. So this is probably like the safest possible way that you can make the play for the standard ladder with Little Knight, but you can't be Dark Locked, so you can't have Resolve the Field spell to do that. Okay, so that is everything I have for today. If you have any questions or suggestions, let me know. If you want to join the Discord, feel free to do that and at me, as I'm quite active. I will be doing more videos in the future and also covering some non-White Forest decks as well. So thanks for watching.